My name is Liam Wickham, and I am the founder of Game-Production.com, where we seek to enable games industry professionals to plan better, lead better, and stop the crunch culture through building a community of support, knowledge, and training. And we were talking about this earlier, and you said you're comfortable talking about this, but how is a woman treated differently in the games industry or in production or whatever you want to talk about? How is that different?
I think you nailed it with what you mentioned before, that games in its infancy was kind of viewed as the boys' club. And so a lot of men saw themselves being able to create these worlds. And then, like, if playing a game with your friends who happen to share that same quality as you of being a boy at the time, you develop those relationships around those games, and then you realize that you can create games. And you're like, oh, well, I can create these experiences. My buddy really loves games too. Let me go ahead and grab them, and we'll do that. And of course, thankfully, in probably the last decade, it's been more acceptable to see girls and women in gaming, right?
Yeah. And
so that has a shift of, and not saying girls didn't play games in the infancy, but of course it just wasn't talked about and it wasn't normalized in a way. But you have, I mean, look at me. I played games as a little girl. I remember I got my first Super Nintendo when I was 5 years old, and I was ecstatic. And so I realized, I mean, at the time when I was little, I didn't know I could make video games. I didn't even conceptualize that people made these. But you have those experiences, and then you're like, I'd really like to do this. And so when you have that predominantly male industry anywhere, even in tech, there are certain aspects, especially with societal norms, that women experience, and men experience things differently too. Men have different societal pressures and women have different societal pressures. And then, of course, any spectrum in between has its own obstacles, mostly due to unfamiliarity. So, of course, one of the big things I think it would be a takeaway from this is there needs to be more men that are willing to hold their peers accountable, and also just understand that there is something called a likability bias. I highly recommend anybody listening to look into what a likability bias is. And then also, it's very important that they listen and they believe. And of course, when you're in a professional setting, you don't want to have to talk about the kind of personal aspects or those viewpoints, but there is a value in that. And of course, there is a delicate line of how much you kind of invest in those conversations. But if someone speaks out that their situation is unique or they feel a certain way, even if you don't agree with those feelings, it doesn't make those feelings any less valid. And also there's kind of this stigma against, like, women being emotional and having these feelings, and somehow kind of like invalidates that or points it to being dramatic. Mm-hmm. And those are very harmful things. And even though they might not seem it on the surface, going back to, like, if you don't experience something, you might not realize that it's actually a problem. And so you need to listen to the folks that do experience those things and those obstacles. Another thing, so I actually have quite a few, because it is exhausting for women specifically on this topic to explain themselves and explain why they feel like there's limited time in the day, and as much as we would love, there's already resources out there.
Yeah.
So instead of like using that energy to constantly explain, it's very much important to do your own research. And of course, that does take effort. There's quite a few things like Googling likability bias. There's actually a great really great resources and videos you can watch about that. But there's also TED Talks. I know that this title can be pretty intimidating, but it's Meeting the Enemy. And by no means does this discussion say that men is the enemy. It's just, I would have named this talk differently personally, but I watched the entire 15 minutes of it, and it was a wonderful perspective. And then there's another TED Talk that is called I've Lived as a Man and a Woman. Mm-hmm. And you get the unique perspective as someone who was born into the role of a man who is finally living their truth as a woman and experiencing how the tech industry differs for their experiences, and how while they were living as a man in society, they didn't, but like, I wouldn't say believe, they didn't realize the different struggles that women experience, for example. So that one's a great one to look up as well.
And of course, I'm presuming, I hope, that you're volunteering to help me with some articles around this, sharing these resources, right?
I definitely will. I would love to kind of consolidate that and kind of have that self-help resource hotline that they can go to.
I think, I mean, let's be honest. I'm a middle-aged, middle-class white male. Anything I say, you can have to take with a pinch of salt because of that. But when you're talking about the likability bias, and then you're talking about the, it can be exhausting having to explain a thing. And of course, when you have to explain a thing, there's an element of feeling like you're having to validate yourself as well. You're having to convince somebody that because there's an argument. When in fact, let's just step back. There's no argument to be had. We know that the bias is there. We know that there are gender biases. We know that there are other kinds of biases. I was quite fortunate because I studied social psychology at university. I had, a lot of exposure to the truth around cognitive bias and stereotyping and prejudice that perhaps I wouldn't have had otherwise. I'm a white male. I'm lucky. I don't have to get up in the morning and think I'm going to have to fight harder because I'm not a white male. I'm very fortunate in that. But I do think I'm also as prone as any other white male, to not put the work in to research and learn and to make sure that the lexicon that I'm using and the way I'm thinking is fair and unbiased and empowering for others, which is what is all you're after, right? You want, because I think in the industry, and I've seen it a lot, people like the male white industry if they're male and white. It's quite comforting. It's like a little boys' club, as I said before, and like you've repeated. It's difficult to shake that out of people. But something I found very, I was very optimistic when I went to work at Sumo Digital up in Sheffield, because the diversity there of all forms was really heartening, and seeing that life's changing a lot with the younger generations. As you insinuated about the way that when you grew up and the way the games were and when I grew up, women weren't interested in coding, and it was just a geeky thing for white males, as it turned out, because of the educational advantages that white males received at the time. And to see it all changing now, to see people coming out of university, men and women, and just to see that happening, to see that changing is heartening, but nobody wants them to enter an industry in which they're going to be still treated poorly and unfairly, just because they're going to come in with that passion. And I think this is rich coming from me, right? Because I've taken all the advantages of who I happen to have been born as, but I do think that people like me have to stop feeling guilty about it and to educate and to go, no, actually, I'm not going to sit in and listen to this sexist conversation, or I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to remain silent when I see something that shouldn't really be happening. Right. So I don't know if I just come across like an arse, Perfectly happy to come across like an arse, as I usually do, but that's my response to what you've said. The likability bias is very interesting, isn't it? That's a good read, that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important takeaway too, is I know, and this is probably my empathy talking, but I know that it has to be an incredible amount of pressure on the middle-aged white man, for example, that you brought up, to feel like this movement is against you, or anything is against you. And I hope anybody that has those privileges can understand that women do not want to be treated differently. They want to be understood. And so it's important to kind of speak up. And it is important for you to share what you shared, because if someone doesn't respect a woman the way that they deserve to be, like anybody deserves to be respected, then them hearing criticism or feedback from that individual, they're not going to hear it. But if they hear it from someone that does look like them, or has the privileges as them, or on the same level of them. So if you have a management team that holds each other accountable and kind of reminds them that, hey, this is a different situation. I mean, we had a situation where, the industry and content creation at large, kind of after the Me Too movement, it's kind of resurfaced again with courageous people coming out and sharing their stories. And we have, unfortunately, that wave happening again of men commenting, saying that, oh, you just want attention, or I don't believe you, and things like that. And that just kind of has people looking at it as, I'm never going to share my experience because I don't. First of all, no one wants to relive that trauma by bringing it up and then it constantly circling over and over in the internet. Also, sure, there's probably some people that may take advantage of situations like this, not just with Me Too, but with any kind of movement. There might be some people that want attention, but I can assure you that would be such a small subset of individuals that you can't constantly think that everyone is wrong.
Yeah.
When they share their experience and things like that. So I thought it was very important that as a company, and I went to the management team about this, that we mention maybe in an email or at our company meeting. We do a meeting every month just to kind of everybody be on the same page and see what we're doing as a company, to bring up that, hey, we understand that there's social climate issues happening specifically in the game industry, that we pride ourselves in the comfort and security of everyone. But here are resources available, and this is where you can go, because safe spaces, I also recommend everyone looking into the value of safe spaces. It's not that anyone's making a girls club or a boys club or anything like that, but they are safe spaces. So since the video game industry is heavily male dominated, it's already a safe space for men. So
correct. Yes.
Us communicating that as a company, and I'm really glad that we did. I heard a lot of rumblings that, oh, I didn't know these resources were available. And now we have that clear expectation, also trying to solidify that, because fortunately at King's Isle, we do have a lot of women in our studio. And I think that is why we're able to continue to make quality content. And it was very important, because imagine because where our full experiences. So when you start at a new company to work at, you don't just leave your previous experiences at the door. So let's say we did have an individual that had poor experiences elsewhere. While they might not experience it at their current employer, then them seeing all of this like stirred up dust that's happening in the industry and seeing this social climate, that probably brings up a lot of trauma that's going on. And so to know that they have a place to go, or that they have, like, they will be listened to and they will be believed, and then they'll also be in a safe space, that is incredibly important for any place of employment in tech, in games, just in general.
Yeah. So what advice would you give people about setting up a safe space if they're in a position of authority in the games industry, in a studio? How do they go about doing that?
Make sure that you have a diverse leadership team. And because, let's say, since it's a male-dominated industry, you only have men in leadership. Let's just go even further to say, like, white male leadership. If you have a person of color or any other minority, they might not be as comfortable to go to the leadership that doesn't identify with them and wouldn't understand the struggles that they go through with that status, that social status. So working diligently to have a diverse leadership team, have resources available, be willing to have those conversations. And a lot of times you just have to listen. You don't even have to have a solution, but if someone feels listened to and kind of gets to, when you speak something out loud or you write it down, that's why journaling is really like helpful with the psyche, is like you get to actually organize your thoughts and your experiences and kind of compartmentalize them and kind of dissect them and accept them. So if you do have someone that kind of understands where you're coming from or understands why a certain situation made you feel a certain way, they can work towards, let's try to approach this in a different way and not put you in that situation again. Now, you might not feel like that. You might think that that situation was trivial, but it's not trivial to someone that lives and breathes that every day or experiences that every day.
There's this cartoon doing the rounds, and I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it's got like somebody like me sat there, and somebody else is saying, about, you have to be aware of the not just the open abuses that can go on, but the sort of the psychological abuses, etc., as well, and the stress pressures that cause, and the etc., and the guy is sort of going like can you just stop going on about it, because I'm really tired now, and the other person simply goes, well, no, because I can't wake up in the morning and go, oh, I'm not bothered. I'm too tired to deal with this. It's like I may be a racial minority. I may be, I'm going to be prejudiced against in some way because of some factor. I don't have a choice. I don't wake up and go, I won't be prejudiced against today. It'll be fine. It's like I don't have the choice that you have. And so, and I know that's rich coming from, like I said, I mean, me, because of my situation. But I feel like because we have a voice here and you have a voice, right? And this is a place that we can share this sort of thing. I'm really happy and thankful, grateful to you that you would be willing to talk about this, because I think it is important to talk about. And may I say, on behalf of the other female producers that I've talked to in the past and worked with, and have come to me, in confidence and said things about the way that they've been treated and etc., which is clearly something that I would like to do something about. And I'm happy that you're the first person who would be prepared to come on and talk about that stuff. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So we're going to put some resources up on the site, right?
Let's do that. Yeah. And also with those resources too, and I'll probably include this in some kind of blog post. We'll hash out the details there, but it's very important to share these resources up the chain. Let's say anybody that might listen to these podcasts or visit your site that is an artist, a designer, QA, customer support, any discipline, if they see any of these things, send it up the chain, especially if the leadership is predominantly male. Send details up the chain to just say, hey, I found this article interesting. Please take the time to look this over and things like that, because everybody's busy. There's situations, but I really do think being aware of your audience and being aware of your diverse team and their unique struggles that they experience day to day, it's so important and will make you a better leader and better management team to be aware of those and educated in those different struggles. So when those obstacles and difficult conversations do come up, you're not completely blindsided, and you can probably find a way to approach that in a constructive way.
Mm-hmm. You can't change your attitudes. You can't change your cognitive biases. You can't change your stereotyping and prejudice by reading a few catchy things somewhere. You actually have to go and follow these links and read these things and think about it. If you haven't already, maybe you have, right? But a lot of people haven't. And I think convincing people who aren't that interested to do that is very hard. It starts at the ground level, and then you have to keep pushing it. And unfortunately, it can be exhausting for people. But for those of us who are white and male, please make the effort, right? Just make the effort, because I was ashamed of myself a few weeks back. I was posting on a forum and big games forum with thousands of people from the games industry, and I said, I'm thinking of making a game with my son, making a video when he gets a bit older. Can the dads here, just help me out? What's your experience of making games with your children? And the first thing that happened was that women came to me and said, replied on the Facebook forum and said, women can make games too. And then somebody said, and grandparents as well, they can make games. It's not just dads. And I was quite ashamed of myself. And I thought, here's a good example of where I was lazy in my thinking. It was actually because I was feeling insecure about being a dad, and I wanted a bit of a dad support cuddle thing. But it was lazy in my thinking, right? I was lazy. I wasn't being respectful. I wasn't remembering, certain things, right? And it was in my head. I was blinkered, and I risked hurting people's feelings because of that. And it's like, when you're in a leadership role in the games industry, you have that responsibility every day. You have to be aware of the language you use and how you represent people and how you are inclusive and how you, like you said, you are willing to create those safe spaces. And it's not just all about verbalizing it, it's about meaning it and making it work. So I do think, there's a great deal of work still to do. And thank you again for speaking out about it.
You're very welcome.
The elements that you're speaking about. And I think we can go all the way back to the beginning of your life when you were dealing with accessibility and special needs, and look at it now. And it's like, there are a lot of people out there who are not white males or, have got, who are not the same as me or the same as you. And in the games industry, we don't come into it because we want to wear a suit and have a normal job. People don't do that. They're usually a bit weird in the games industry. And, I've worked with a lot of really weird people, and I like them. I like them being weird and different. And it's ironic that, therefore, the people at the top aren't really supporting that. And anyway, I'm not really expressing it very well, but hopefully you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important. And this would be more for everyone, because I definitely don't want to think it's kind of like a punching bag situation, because men have their unique experiences too, and their different unique contributions. And also, like I said before, the societal pressure and things like that. So I really think a message for everyone is we need to be more respectful and kind in the fact that we don't always assume ill intent, because you sharing that story about you wanting to, as a dad, because that's your experience, and making a game with your son, that you were sharing your experience and you kind of wanted to gauge that initiative and like how to approach it, because you probably even subconsciously figured other dads probably had this same line of thought. And so I really hope the responses that you got were very respectful and understanding, and just trying
I
to
was
give
the one
you a
who felt
different.
like a jerk. Yeah.
But the thing is, you inherently did not do anything wrong from my perspective with how you explained it. I didn't see the post or anything, but I have seen a lot of very malicious responses to that, to where it's like they immediately took, like, let's just say, like, I struggle with taking things too personally sometimes, and I have to take a step back. Self-reflection, by the way, is so important. I wish more people did it. Like, we need to normalize self-reflection.
Like you said about journaling. Yeah.
Yeah. And just understanding that we make mistakes too, and we just need to learn from those. There's nothing to be ashamed of making mistakes, but we need to be careful about always assuming ill intent. And if someone viewed your post with you having good intentions, which is why I view it differently, is I see your good intention. You're a dad and you were trying to, like, because when there's female things, like female specific things that I go through, I typically reach out to other women to get feedback from that, because they share those similar experiences as me. But if we view these situations with good intentions, we can literally just add to the conversation and say, hey, did you think of it this way? Did you, like, would you be interested in a woman's perspective? Because we make games too. Like, there's ways to approach those conversations where you're not immediately on the defensive. And that goes for everybody. Because I've definitely been in conversations where I do bring up women in games in general, and the immediate response from a male or man, excuse me, would be, oh, but I don't think that way. I'm different. I'm a different man. I don't do that. And it was never meant to be malicious. It was just stating a scenario or a fact and things like that. So I think we could all, as a society and not just games, approach things with good intentions. Like, let's assume good intentions instead of assuming ill intentions, because I found that more often than not, the conflict is misunderstanding and someone assuming that someone was being malicious, and that is not the case the majority of the time, and from my perspective.
When I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, I can see that there are so many discussions at different levels going on about so many different things around just be fair and treat people fairly, and just be willing to accept that people like myself are in a very favorable position, and it's not exhausting to be me in those ways, and I don't have to justify myself all the time. And I guess the reason I'm still going on about this in our discussion is because one thing that you learn when you really think about this hard is you probably are treating, say, women differently, especially women differently, when you look at leadership. Because we know in psychology and with like cognitive bias and all this sort of thing, that there is a perception that leadership belongs to men, It's much harder to promote somebody who is not a man. Yeah. It's much harder to say, I want you to be part of the sort of the boys gang up here, like this small elite circle. Because they're going to spoil it, aren't they? Because they're not a man. And there's a lot, there's a lot of research around this. This is not about the games industry. This is just business psychology. This is cognitive bias. This is just the way things really are. And it's not just restricted to the games industry. You're not going to move out of the games industry and find that it's necessarily 100% fixed somewhere else. It's just that this is a young industry, and it's the boys club is now up into their 40s and 50s and 60s, and will get replaced, right? But up until that point, all of us in that fortunate position have to be very self-aware that we don't jump to conclusions because of that bias. And I think there's a responsibility for us to be aware of that.
Yeah, typically it's the likability bias. If a woman comes across direct about or showing leadership qualities, they can come off as intimidating or aggressive and bossy, like all of these very kind of like words that are used as blanket statements as very derogatory when it's used towards women. But of course, then on the other token, if a woman is agreeable and nice, they're usually viewed as incompetent or not up for the challenge. And so it's kind of a losing battle. And like you said, you don't have to wake up and kind of walk on that tightrope of sorts. And it's just something that people probably feel guilty about when they're approached about it, but it's just something you have to unlearn. And I know that's hard, and it's hard work. And we have more information available to us at our fingertips than we'll ever be able to fully learn and understand. But when it comes to a business and a society, even where you're going to interact with those diverse people, it is going to be much better to learn how to interact and how to provide those opportunities for everyone. And I'll reiterate again that women do not want to be treated differently. They just want to be understood. Like, no one wants to be given a handout or be given a leg up, because that's how we got into this situation to begin with, is men have been afforded an opportunity to have a leg up. We just want to kind of level the playing field, no puns intended, and just be given that opportunity and be able to shine as brightly as we know that we can.
Very well said indeed. And if I can just reiterate from the point of view of clumsy white men like myself, be clumsy, be awkward, be embarrassed, and just still carry on talking about it. Make all the mistakes, sound stupid, but learn. Just keep learning. Just keep investigating it. Don't. If you, what's that expression about? If you see evil, if you're walking towards something evil happening, don't cross the road and ignore it. Just keep your eyes open and don't be blinkered just because it can be a bit knackering or confusing or scary. Just do what I do. Just talk about it and make the mistakes and sound like an idiot and just carry on and keep going. Because then when you get into your daily life and you're a manager or a director somewhere, then you'll be aware. You will think about it. When there's a choice of who to promote, when you're looking at reviews, when you're looking at your senior position and how to treat people, this will just get into your head, and it will force you to think about it. So just keep trying anyway, even if you're an awkward git like me. So thank you for talking all about that. And do you want to say anything else about that, or should we move on?
I think that nailed pretty much all of it. And of course, we still have work to do. So I look forward to those initiatives. And I really appreciate you being willing to use your platform to have these conversations. I know it's a difficult conversation and a very delicate one. And it's always just important to have, there's a book about difficult conversations. It's called Crucial Conversations. And so if you're going to be in leadership, you need to be able to have those too. And of course, sometimes they're going to be about things that are uncomfortable and unfamiliar.
Thanks for listening. As always, we really appreciate your thoughts and feedback about the show. You can reach out to us by visiting game-production.com's podcast pages and leaving comments under each episode. We have a Facebook group and YouTube channel that you can find linked from the website. If you want to contribute or fancy a chat in the future, we'd love to hear from you.